Bradley Coleman, 29 years old, just shy of 30. He was a teacher. He was a coach. He was a beloved friend. He was the father of a beautiful 4-year-old girl. And he's the son of Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, who are sitting right here. July 10th, 2022, the last face that he saw was his. The last thing that he felt was a bullet. It went through bone, brain, came out of his neck. The last breath that he took, choking on his own blood. Why? Because they wanted a car. July 10th, 2022, just a little bit past noon, at the QT gas station at Peachtree Ford. Mr. Coleman took his Dodge Charger, pulled up to put air in his tire. The defendants, who were gang members, backed in right beside him. While Mr. Coleman was down, his rear tire putting it in, this man, Josiah Hewley, got out of the car and went into Mr. Coleman's car. What he didn't know was that another car had pulled up right behind him in order to put air in his tire. Josiah backed out, he hit that car. That gave Mr. Coleman time to get up, open the passenger side, and grab Mr. Hewley. Mr. Hewley dragged him out of the car, and during the struggle, put a gun to his head, shot and killed Bradley Coleman. While that was going on, this man, David Booker, jumped out of the other car that brought them there, came up with a gun to provide support. When the gunshot went down, they fled in the car driven by this man, Mr. Collins. Here's what it looks like. Mr. Coleman's car. The defendants. How do we know that it was these three? Because what the evidence is going to show you is that Josiah Hewley was the shooter, that David Booker provided armed support, and that Miles Collins drove them to the QT and away from the QT. The evidence is also going to show that these two members are part of the 9 Trey Bloods, a violent gang that is known for stealing cars, as well as sex, money, murder. How are we going to show that? Because you're going to see the gang evidence that ties these defendants to those violent gangs, you will see the gang evidence of David Booker, where he proudly proclaims 9 Trey Bloods, also known as Billy Badass. You're going to see other social media posts proudly proclaiming 9 Trey gangsters.
Okay, trying to beat up on me folks. Alright. You trying to get over that shit like that. Hey, you like that for him? Right up down, and I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay.
You'll see the significance of the tattoos, including the ones not hidden behind bow ties or shirts zipped up. You're going to see it for David Booker. You're going to see Miles Collins.
Billy gang shit. Yeah, real Billy gang shit. But get what? I never get them street laws. Nigga, mind your business, get money, and shut the fuck up, nigga.
Facts, nigga. What the fuck you talking about?
You're going to see the gang evidence of Josiah Healy, the shooter, all over his body, and the hand signs, proudly proclaiming on social media his membership in a violent and deadly gang. You're going to see other evidence, too, that among the crimes of 9 Trey Bloods and sexual murder, they steal cars. And you're going to see the defendants, each and every one, has stolen cars before. Because of gang members. The cars were violent. And on July 10th, 2022, they did it again. But this time, somebody had to die. And that was Bradley Coleman. The evidence is going to show that as they fled the scene, the car that they rented had its license plates captured on a license plate reader. Vehicle movements were tracked, showing that as that car fled the scene, they went back to their neighborhood. The owner was located, the car was a rental, and it was rented by David Booker and Miles Collins on July 8th, just 2 days before they murdered Bradley Coleman. You're going to see the cell phone evidence that was seized in the search warrant, showing that those photographs and those IDs came from their cell phones. You're going to see that David Booker provided his Georgia ID, but he wasn't 21. So Miles Collins provided his driver's license. John, next slide, please. Quick. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go back to the slide? Yes, sir. Thank you. In addition, you're going to see the text between Miles Collins, his girlfriend, Jamira Pledger, actually sent payment for that automobile. That's this defendant. You're going to see that this defendant, Mr. Booker, is the one that obtained the mandatory insurance for that automobile. You're also going to see that a few hours before, the night before, July 9th, Mr. Booker drove to a Texaco gas station, and we know that because the license plate reader captured the movement as they were driving around. And at that Texaco station, he was wearing the same sweatshirt, and he bought a blue COVID mask. Why does that become important? Well, on the day of the murder, when Bradley Coleman went to the QT to put air in his tires, the defendants pulled up, and then she saw Mr. Hewley got out of that Mercedes. He shot and he killed Mr. Coleman, and he jumped back in. But Mr. Hewley, as he dragged Mr. Coleman out, dropped the mask. You saw that Mr. Booker came up in support and that Mr. Hewley shot and killed Bradley Coleman. Mr. Booker rented the car, got the insurance, ran up with his gun in support. Mr. Collins provided the support by helping to rent the car, driving them to, helping them to escape. So here are the witnesses that you're going to hear through trial, because you're going to hear certain just groupings of witnesses. And the first set of witnesses that you're going to hear are going to be witnesses from the state that were actually at the scene, where they saw the scuffle, where they heard the car peeling off, where they gave statements to the police. And then you're going to hear from the police and the responding officers that came to the scene. Photographs are going to be admitted. And then other evidence, including the mask that Mr. Hewley dropped. And the way we know that Mr. Hewley dropped it is because the murderer's DNA was left at the scene on that mask. You're going to see what's called CSLI, which is cell site location information. You're going to hear about how every time you have your cell phone and you make a phone call, it attaches to the closest cell tower. And then you can literally track the movements from the neighborhood all the way up to the QT. You're also going to hear that if your phone is not making that phone call, that if you have an app on your phone, that there's something called data location. And what you're going to find is his DNA at the scene and digital DNA for every one of the defendants. As they came up from their neighborhood to the QT, where Mr. Coleman was killed, then left that area and went back to their neighborhood and immediately returned the car. But then it's going to get even deeper, because you're also going to hear from the expert witness that's going to come in here and tell you that the probability of statistics is 1 in like a quintillion. It's Mr. Hewley's DNA. You're going to hear from the cell site and digital forensic experts who are going to be able to track the cars, and more specifically the cell phones, and more specifically the defendant's cell phone, from their neighborhood up to the QT and back again, or their data. Then you're going to hear from the lead detective also, who come through the digital extractions from the phones, when the phones were downloaded. Miles Collins, his girlfriend Jamar Pledger, David Booker, and Josiah Hewley. You're going to hear from gang experts who are going to tell you the purpose of gangs like man trade, sex, money, murder. You're going to learn how we know that the defendants are associates and members of those gangs, and they're cooperative gangs, by the way. You're going to hear from other victims who've had their cars stolen too. They're going to be able to testify because they weren't murdered. Then, you're going to see the certified prior felony convictions of the defendants. Throughout the trial, you're going to see other connections too. Like the sweatshirt at the Texaco, at the scene. Like text messages, right, just moments after the murder. I can't say it over the phone, but some shit just happened. You're going to see other connections too. On the cell phones, turning the car immediately after the murder. For these events, the defendants have been charged with felony murder for the aggravated assault, shooting Mr. Coleman, individually and as parties to a crime. Then you're going to see 2 counts attached to that for violation of the Street Gang Terrorism Prevention Act, gang charges. And the gang charges are repetitive for each substantive count. One for participating in that kind of gang activity, and the other one is what you're going to hear from the experts is it's an expectation of gang members to do these things. For the gunshot, individually and as parties to a crime. Felony murder based on the hijacking of the motor vehicle, and gang charges attached to that. The substantive charge of hijacking the motor vehicle, and then possession of firearms during the commission of murder. The defendants are all represented by very good defense counsel. The evidence will not go unchallenged. You will hear cross-examination. I want you to listen carefully. Because cross-examination will sound like it's a college or something. Oh, when you go to the crime scene, you take photos. And when you take photos, you put them in markers. When you put them markers, you put them beside the important pieces of evidence. It'll be cross-examination. But on the most, it'll sound like it's a college or something, but on the most important elements, his DNA, his cell phone, his text, his data location, their memberships in the gangs. There's not going to be one cross-examination question that creates even a moment of hesitancy in your mind. And at the end of the day, I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask you to return a verdict of guilty because this county lost teacher, coach, father of a beautiful young lady, son, for a dead young car. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Melvin. Mr. Lewis, do you wish to make